All right. Peace and blessings from the Almighty power, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It is your brother Kayala, aka Boss Up, coming to you with another lesson on how we as a people can boss up, right? Build our society up. Today, we're going to dive into something that is very, very critical and is a foundation for everything that we plan to and intend to do within our community in order to organize ourselves as a structure that can be taken seriously and to implement everything that we desire as a community, as a society, right? We all know it starts with money. It starts with money right now with the way that things are. We again are the people who are charged the highest interest rates. We are the people that are least likely to get a loan to be able to fund the different programs that we'd like to build, the different organisms that we'd like to add into our communities, into our society. So we have to find a way to fund ourselves. And it's unfortunate, but it's a reality that we can definitely make happen. So today we're going to dive into some of the basic principles and show you why those things are important and pivotal and get into where we'd like to be as a people. All right. So let's go ahead and bring it up on the stage. Today we are going to dive into foundations of money, labor, value, and circulation. Right. This is going to be a first principles approach to economic empowerment. Right? This is what we're desiring. This is what we're looking for to be able to fund our own communities, to be able to have an established power economically, so that way we can continue to funnel the money within our own communities, within ourselves. You see this principle practice in a lot of different communities, right? There are Asiatic peoples that spend money amongst themselves. There are quote unquote Jewish people that spend money amongst themselves, et cetera, et cetera. We are the probably the people who have the shortest lifespan of the dollar within our own communities. And that has to change in order for us to, again, establish our own society and start doing and building for ourselves. All right. So, economics 101, right? Today we're going to talk about the goals. The goals are to define labor, to define trust, to define value, to define money, and to define what circulation means, right? So if we don't define these things correctly, right, everything that we do from here on out becomes wrong. If we don't have a proper understanding of what these things mean, everything that we do and the concepts that come from it or that they're based on are wrong, incorrect, right? So this is why we're going to go forth and define these things. So starting at the top, what is labor? Labor is a human effort that is applied to create or move something useful, right? Labor being the human effort, human obviously being something that is done by people. The effort, the effort can be physical, can be mental, or it can be emotional energy, right? Sometimes you have to put a mental application to things. Sometimes you have to put a physical application or effort to things, and sometimes it has to be an emotional input. Um, what's applied is something that's intentionally directed, not accidental. Um, and something that's useful is something that meets or satisfies the need or the desire that we're seeking to achieve. Right. If the end goal is to be able to have our own society, then all of the things that we deem useful would be geared towards satisfying that desire. The fund of the nation, right? Labor is what activates the land and the tools, right? The annual labor of every nation is the fund which originally supplies it with all the necessaries and conveniences of life. This is a quote directly from a man named Adam Smith, right? You can go and read his book. I'll cite that at the end of the presentation, but it's a very good book. Um, the yearly labor of every nation, right, is the fund, right? That labor being the fund, the thing that adds the value or brings the that is the value that channels all of those things that are necessary and convenient for life. Nothing, I mean nothing useful exists in an economy unless somebody worked to create it, right? Therefore, the labor is the true wealth, right? Because all of those things that we desire, or all of those things that we deem necessary or useful in our economies, somebody had to work in order to create it. The stoplight, the different foods that we eat, right? There's labor and toil that goes into each and every one of these aspects of our economic system. Well, what is value? Value is the usefulness of something as recognized by other people, right? So let's take water, for instance. Water has very little value where it is considered abundant, but it has an extreme value where it is scarce, right? This is where you get this is where you start to mix and mingle with supply and demand. The places where it may not be as uh, of the places where it may not be as accessible are the places where the value of it is increased because of the need of it or the usefulness of it, the desire to have it and it's satisfying. Value in itself is not intrinsic and it depends on the usefulness. Again, if you have one use for something or one function for something, one desire that it can satisfy, the less likely that value is to be high. However, water, with its various different applications within the community or everyday life itself, the necessity that the human body has for water, it has a very high value, especially in those places where it is hard to get, right? And the usefulness also depends on the context. Here you see two different pictures or two different settings of life. One where the environment itself is scarce of water, deprived of water, and you have another setting where it is plentiful, so plentiful that it's being used in a playful manner, whereas others deem it a little bit more necessary for life itself, right? So not only can in the desert land or the arid region, not only can it be used for to drink, right? But it could also be utilized for plant life here, right? That's something that water would be useful for in this area to be able to grow things where it doesn't look like it is growing at all. Um, so the usefulness of it depends on the context or maybe the setting. Also, the recognition is social. The recognition of value is social. What do I mean by that? The society itself deems what is valuable, right? There are, again, different communities, different societal infrastructures that may deem things uh, more valuable in one setting than in another, or amongst one people or another, right? So these are the things that we have to take into consideration when we are defining what value is. All of this is leading up to a point, I promise you. But first, we want to get the definitions out of the way. So that way we all are moving along with the same understanding of what these things are, what they mean. So that way later, when we start to dive a little bit more deeply into how finances play a part in what we are looking to do as building our society up, everybody is on the same page, right? Here's the labor theory of value, going back to the understanding that nothing useful is of value, or nothing we have in this economic society is uh, created without labor, right? Now, with the labor theory of value, nothing acquires value unless human effort makes it usable, right? What do I mean by that? Here's an example. A tree in itself in the forest has a lot of potential, right? But the labor has value because the labor has to cut it, the labor has to transport that tree or the logs from one place to another, and the labor has to then shape it or turn it into a piece of furniture or um, what have you, whether you desk, chair, bed, dresser, so on and so forth. Right. So the labor that goes into it determines the value. The tree in itself doesn't have any potential, or doesn't have anything but potential. You know, although the trees assist in producing oxygen, so on and so forth. Their value, right? That value, that financial value, is placed on it once the labor goes into it. And then a house has value because the labor assembled the materials. So you have the person who cut the tree down, the person who transported the tree, the person who has now shaped the wood, and then a house in itself being assembled from those various different materials, and all of those steps being met and completed, leading all the way up into, is what adds the value, or what sets the value for the house. So value in itself is created by labor. The price is assigned by the markets, right? So value and price, they may oftentimes be conflated. However, they're very different, right? The value is what we place on it. The price is what the market then utilizes that value and tries to keep something within the same realm. So the labor creates the value, then it gets harvested and or crafted, and then the community exchanges, right? It gets shipped, it gets passed along to a company that's going to then trim it, or a company that's going to, make the furniture, what have you. Company that's going to make the furniture, what have you, and then the value in itself becomes a home. But money, I think it's important that we define money, because a lot of our people have a misunderstanding about what money actually is. Money is a socially accepted record of value that is created by the labor, right? So by socially accepted, I mean that, others agree to recognize it, right? If I were to engage in barter with somebody, and I have, a, let's say, a cell phone as a form of money, or a form of receipt here, form of exchange goods here, does not mean that it is recognized if I take it over to Ethiopia, right? That society has not accepted or agreed to recognize that form of payment, or that form of money, right? So money in itself is a socially accepted record, right? Socially accepted record. So when we engage in commerce amongst one another, right, it is a lot easier for us to come into agreement with what we accept socially as records of labor, right? And by record, obviously meaning documentation, not the substance itself. Value is based on the usefulness, and then created by labor, meaning that the work has already been done. Why money exists? It solves timing, right? Matching and storage. So with the receipt, right, being the money, it works for you because number one, a person works and then they get paid. The money that they were paid is a receipt of the labor that they have done. And then with that money, or with that money within their social structure, their society, they get to then spend it, because amongst that social structure, uh, it is recognized or agreed upon that it is acceptable, right? So this is what money is. Depending on the system or the societal structure that you're a part of, money can then be determined based on them agreeing, right? Money obviously is not universally recognized equally amongst all people. This is why you have places such as currency exchanges, right? Now, moving on. When dealing with money, you have to think of every dollar or quarter in your pocket not as math or luck, but as a social receipt, right? So when you perform the labor, whether you're fixing a car or you're caring for a child, you are putting energy and time into the community. Now, money is that community's way of saying we acknowledge the work that you did. Here's a record of that effort and that time that you put in, so you can claim something that you deem and that we will accept as equal value later, right? Meaning that that money can now be spent at the same rate in which you received it, because the society has accepted the value of that receipt that you were given based on the labor that you put in. I hope that makes sense. I hope y'all follow me. Um, so a quarter in itself relies on previously completed work, because in a functional system, you shouldn't have the quarter unless you or someone who gave it to you already provided usefulness for or to someone else, right? So money is acquired because the work and the labor is already done. So the value of that quarter or that dollar has already been set. The physical object, which is the metal in a quarter or the paper in a dollar itself, is not the value. I know that you know the society would have you think that. That's not the case, right? The Because and when we talk biblically, it says that there's going to come a time, or it's going to get to a point where people are pretty much going to be tossing money into the street. Why? Because it's going to be useless at that point. The value of it is going to be determined or deemed to be worthless, right? So societally, those things are based on what the society deems value is, not necessarily what the material is of that physical object. um, the social agreement, right? The agreement amongst your society is the value. The value is the trust. The value is the trust, and we'll get into that in a second. The value is the trust that the record of your past work will be honored by a stranger in the future. What does that mean? That means that when you go to work and you put in the labor, the time, the effort, and you are paid by something that is socially acceptable, being dollar bills, the trust is that that person that is paying you, or that job that is paying you, is giving you something that will later be acknowledged by others in the society to have the same value in which you received it, right? So within a social structure, if there were to be a barter system established, and as a society we decide, hey, listen, this is going to be this bottle of hand sanitizer is going to be worth A, this phone is going to be worth B. When you are putting in your time and your labor, and then you're paid with hand sanitizer at value A, the trust between you and I is that when you go to purchase something later on in the future, that the value of this hand sanitizer does not go down once it leaves my hands and comes to you. And that the society that we've built will continue to acknowledge this hand sanitizer as having the same value A that you got it from me from. Right? That's a trust that's being built amongst one another within a society or a social structure. That's key. The proof, right? If you have 4 quarters, it is proof to the world that you have done a unit of labor that you haven't spent yet, right? Meaning that having the physical hand sanitizer or dollar is the proof that you have been compensated for work that you put in, that you yourself have not exchanged for something of equal value yet, right? Therefore, that money, whether it's dollar, 4 quarters, a bottle of hand sanitizer, is the receipt that you hold on to, right? With the aspirations to find something of equal value later and to be able to exchange it. I see where I'm going here. Hope y'all tuned in with me. This, I know it's a lot in a short period of time, but again, we are just defining things right now. We haven't even got to the meat and the potatoes. Money in itself, right, is stored labor. The money represents work that has already been completed but not yet exchanged, stored, being preserved, saved. Sometimes in American society, money continues to build interest the length of time that you save it or preserve it. Right? Again, that is based on the social agreement. So if you work today, you don't consume everything today. The money allows you to carry that work or the receipt of that work into the future. So money in itself does not store energy physically, but it stores the claims of that energy. What do I mean by that? The work that you put in is energy, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional. The money is a receipt of that energy spent. So now you've given energy and you received an energy of that stored of that labor that you put out. You receive an energy of labor that you can utilize later to now spend on something of equal value. This is true wealth of a nation. And this is why you have people looking to save money. Why? So that way later they can utilize those receipts that have been determined of value later to purchase something of equal value. For all of the labor and work that they've put in, they've received that money and stored it up because the work's been completed, but the money has not yet been exchanged for something else. You see what I'm saying? Now, this is where things start to get a little bit differently because now you have to think of money as um, a battery, right? And this is where we start to see two different states of things. And this is the difference in a lot of cases between the communities of the blacks and Hispanics and other individual nations such as the quote unquote Jews or um, X, Y, and Z. Energy is either in a coupled state or a decoupled state. The coupled state says this, right? The baker bakes the bread, the baker eats the bread. Very simple, right? The results, the labor, which is the bread, is consumed immediately. So there's no storage, there's no need for any trust between one another or any need for a currency to be exchanged. If you bake the bread, you eat the bread, your labor that you put into it, that you determine the value of, is consumed immediately. Or if you try to save the bread for later, over time, the value of that bread decreases as the bread molds, right? So that coupled state of you not detaching from the bread shows you that the value can go down with certain labors. However, the decoupled state, which again we see within successful communities and successful societies, is the monetary exchange or the exchange of something of equal value. Oftentimes, it's money in this society. The action, you bake the bread, you sell the bread, and you receive the money for the bread. And then you take that money and then you go and buy something else or you buy more bread, right? And it creates a circulation of that money, right? Because 9 times out of 10, the baker selling the bread is going to be selling it to somebody in their community who's already commenced to doing labors where now they have money to exchange it. Uh, that person may own a grocery store to where now that labor is transferring from you to the person who buys the bread, and then they sell the bread at their grocery store to people within the community who also deem that bread to have a certain value. And so it continues to circulate throughout the community. Meanwhile, you take your money and you buy more materials to bake more bread. And so it becomes an ongoing cycle of decoupled energy, right? That continues to feed itself because it stays within the community, right? Now, the advantage of the decoupled state is you now hold the value of the object without the actual object, right? That's where that decoupling comes into place because you're no longer attached to that object. However, you've received the monetary value for that object and that labor that you put in, and that money is the receipt that you can use to redeem something else. So whether you decide to spend that money or that energy next month or in another city or on something other than bread, that advantage is yours to be able to do with it what you will because you've earned it by putting in that labor. And this is your receipt. So from a closed loop, which we have in our society been suffering from, to a decoupled value. Um, this is a bridge that we are going to be creating from one person to another, right? But that involves trust. That involves trust because now you're receiving the money from the other person. You have to trust that what they've given you is going to be acknowledged by the society as the same value later on, or in another city that you go to or amongst another people, right? Trust in itself is the belief that others will honor an agreement in the future. Universal trust, money in itself, is the most universal and efficient system of mutual trust ever devised. This is this is a direct quote from a guy named Yuval Noah Harari, right? I'll cite his book in a couple slides as well. But let's dispel a notion really quick. Trust in itself is not blind faith, right? It's not optimism. It's not morality, right? I know the society that we're in may lead us to believe that these words are all synonymous and that they all circulate around the same meaning, and they're interchangeable. That's not the case when it comes to the trust that we're speaking of. Trust is an expectation based on system behavior, right? So again, what we're looking to do is create a system within our society that becomes what we put our trust in, rather than the people having blind faith in the people, being optimistic about what they may or may not do or their morality. We're putting a trust in the system that we've all agreed to, right? That's the difference. So that way the money can continue to circulate. Now, what is circulation? Circulation is the movement of money through people, institutions, and time, right? Money inwardly moves between members of the same community before leaving, right? Ideally, that's what we want. That's what we need. However, where we are is outward circulation, which is where the money exits the community to external systems, whether utilities, taxes, ABC, XYZ, cell phone networks, you name it. But these are all reasons why it's important for us as a people to continue to build up our society so that way our infrastructure from within can be from or with members of the same community, right? Um, communities tend to collapse financially because the money leaves, but because it leaves, not because the money leaves, but because it leaves immediately, right? So again, going back to the point where the dollar within the black communities immediately leaves almost instantaneously. We don't spend money with one another. And this is why our communities continue to be at the bottom. Our communities continue to be in the ghettos, the suburbs. Our communities continue to be deemed of lesser value. And then when they're gentrified and people of other nationalities move in and kick us out, the value goes up. Why? Because those people are more likely to circulate the dollar within their community before it exits and leaves, right? So again, the value is dependent upon the circulation of the money within the community. And this creates within ourselves not only trust, but a saving circle, right? Creates a saving circle because now we're spending money with each other and we're saving money amongst each other. But then having a collective pot to which we invest in is very key because then the community in itself can see some of its goals met, right? And here's why saving circles work. They exist and work because they store labor collectively, right? Not us all going and putting our muscles into a jar. However, that money being a receipt of the labor and the energy of labor that can be utilized later, right? Because I can take that money and I can buy someone's labor, or I can pay someone to do ABC XYZ for me. I can pay somebody to build my house. That money is the stored labor, right? So as long as I have it, I have the potential to buy labor later on, right? A savings circle stores that labor collectively. It replaces collateral, right? The physical thing with trust, right? So now I don't have to say, oh well, let me hold on to your cell phone until you get back. Right. We're establishing trust because that system is in place and it has become efficient and effective. That saving circle forces the circulation of the dollar internally, right? Because the more that we are investing together collectively into that saving circle, the more we're going to want to see one another have the money, which means that we have to spend the money amongst one another, right? See how this is all going hand in hand? Um, and then that savings circle in itself reduces the individual risk. Why should one person have to shoulder the burden of being able to supply or buy or build things for the entire community, right? That's a lot of risk for one person or two people rather than the community as a whole being able to come together and to invest in and trust in one another to be able to accomplish something, right? To meet a need, to meet a desire. Saving circles in themselves are proto institutions. What do I mean by that? More than saving groups, saving circles replicate banking functions. Everything that a saving circle is what a bank is, right? They have deposits through regular contributions. They have liquidity via rotating lump sum access, right? If somebody needs something, we have a lump sum that we may be able to dish out or shell out with the trust that those things are going to be getting done for the community or they're going to be invested back into the savings circle, right? They have risk management through social accountability, aka that trust. They have a governance through shared rules and enforcement via the agreed upon social acceptances. And they have people who become the institution before the institution actually exists, right? So the saving circle in itself, up until a certain point, acts as a proto institution or a pre institution, right? You are operating with the functions of a banking institution without having an actual banking institution yet, right? So this is why saving circles are important, and this as a community is where we start to invest in one another. But we have to have a good understanding of what we're investing, why we're investing, how investments work, which is why we went through the definitions first, so that way we all have a same similar understanding of what these things mean and how to apply them. And so now this is where we transition from a savings circle because this is what they build. They create a core foundation of finance. They create financial discipline and long term thinking amongst one another, right? Not only do we have a pot of money, but we have ways in which we can increase it, ways in which we can responsibly spend it to benefit the whole rather than an individual. We have trust networks and reputational credit, right? I understand that this person is guaranteed to bring in such and such amount of money to this saving circle every X, Y, and Z amount of time, right? So I can trust him and he can trust me. He has a reputational credit with me and vice versa. They build internal capital pools and reserves, right? They build tested governance with real consequences. All right, well, we know that if this person is not being responsible with the money, or if this person is stealing with the money, or if this person is not adding as much as he has vowed to, as what we deem socially acceptable because of, refusal, that tested governance and those consequences that follow will help you establish consistency. And then that trust in itself becomes the currency, and that behavior becomes the collateral. You see what this is? You see how everything is connected, right? It's all tied together, and it's beautiful because as these things are being done, the community in itself is being funded, right? The community in itself is being funded all by labor, which, you know, realistically speaking, we've done more than our fair share of free labor, right? We are some of the most overworked people that you will find in the world, right? However, the least paid. But that's because the value of the people has been determined by the society rather than the value of our labor being determined by us. And now we move from a saving circle, which has built all of those things, to having our own sovereign institution, right? As a saving circle, uh, as the circles scale and coordinate, they evolve into community lending systems, right? Which we can help one another out and make sure that we don't suffer at the hands of a Wells Fargo or, a Bremer Bank or any of those institutions that charge us an extreme interest rate because of who we are. You have a cooperative credit union and a mutual bank. You have investments funds and land-based finance. You have, the power continuing and being contained within our own community. We have empowered one another and we've empowered ourselves as a whole rather than looking to external sources for the power to be given to us. And it creates a dependency on extractive system. It creates a dependency on one another rather than the dependency being on an extractive system. Uh, and our people continue to charter the paperwork, right? We already have the records going, right? Which is a lot of what financial institutions are based on is the records, right? The records which will speak to someone's credit, will speak to someone's reputation. That's why they run your credit before they decide to give you a loan. But if we've already built up that credit within one another or amongst one another, right? We don't need to go to them and depend on them to trust our credit because we have that trust amongst one another, right? And so this is the goal. This is how we start to build our society up. It starts from a basic understanding of what money is, what saving circles are, what trust is, how labor can be utilized to set up something that we see multiply within these other nations, communities, right? So it's time for us to take that ideology and replicate it amongst ourselves, so that way we can start to have a power, have a voice, have a dominance amongst one another, and have a collective body, which quite frankly, we've been disenfranchised from. So hope that was good. Here are some of the here are some of the authors of the books in which were cited today, right? Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, 1776. David Ricardo, The Principles of Political Economy and Taxation, 1817, right? You have Karl Marx in Das Kapital in 1867. You have Henry David Thoreau, the book Walden in 1854. You have Neil Ferguson, The Ascent of Money in 2008. You have Michael Saylor, The Mobile Wave and Modern Lectures. So Hope that this has been good. I hope that you learned a lot. I hope that you continue to tune in because we're gonna continue to boss up and build our society up from the ground all the way to the sky. Right? There's nothing that can and should be able to stop us as long as we continue to trust in one another and build with one another. The sky is the limit as long as the Most High of Abraham, the Most High God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is our power. Right? It's been a pleasure. It's your brother Boss Up. It's your brother Boss Up coming to you, and hope that you stay tuned in. Until next time.